Okay, so I'm really pleased to be here. This is it's just delightful to see all your faces. Um, since COVID, I haven't been working anymore, and actually before that, I was stuck in Morocco for 9 months. So when I came back, we were in the throes of COVID, and all my work is gone. And it's just I love doing presentations. I love working individually with people, and so this is really great. It makes my heart feel really good. So before I go, I have a slide presentation. So and what I'd like to suggest is that you have a pen and paper close to hand with you, because I'm not going, as I talk, I'm going to be telling some stories later on. And I would like you to enter into this material with me. Otherwise, what happens is material tends to go in one ear and out the other. And I'd really like this material to kind of sit with you if possible. I mean, that's kind of why I wrote the book, so that people would have a manual to negotiate this time of life in a way that is life-giving rather than life-denying. So I don't know if any of you listened to Charles Garfield's presentation at Ashby Village in July. He had written a book called Our Wisdom Years. And Eric very graciously sent me that because I know Charles' work, and I wanted to make sure that we didn't cover the same terrain, and we didn't. But I think this is a good segue to his presentation. So his presentation was pretty much giving you things to reflect on, attitudes pretty much, that we can develop as we age. This is taking a slightly different tack. It's looking more specifically and using story to get at material that it's important for us to experience as we age. So it turns out both of us wrote a book to talk about aging. Because both of us, he said that he couldn't find a book to talk about aging well. And I couldn't find a book that talked about aging from the inside out. There's a lot of books on aging right now, but many of them are focused on a lot of the practicalities of aging, which I have at the end of my book, but or they're focused on staying healthy, which is important, but they're not looking at what's going on inside of us as we age. And so that's what I wanted to bring, that voice to the dialogue of what it's like to be older. So what we're going to do, I'm going to share my slideshow with you now. And let's see, there it is. All right, so we're gonna get big here. Good. Okay, so I titled today Aging in the Inner Life because that's exactly what the talk is about. So we're going to look at the experience of aging through the developmental theories of three people. Carl Jung, who was a Swiss psychiatrist and is actually really the primary person to look at the experience of aging as a positive experience and one that is necessary for fullness of life. And then there's Alan Chennan, we're going to use some of his fairy tales. So he is a psychiatrist at Langley Porter in the city, and he's also a world traveler. So as he was traveling the globe, he was collecting these fairy tales from around the world. And when he got home at some point, he started dividing them into themes. And he has several books now written using these fairy tales for different times of life, like development for women, development for men. But his first book was called In the Ever After, Fairy Tales for the Second Half of Life. So we're going to use his tales because they illustrate some of the tasks that we need, that we encounter as we grow older. And the fairy tales do so in a light, playful way, but it gets at material that is really deep. And then there's the theory of Transcendence, which, because I want to leave enough time for Q&A, we won't go into Transcendence in depth, but you could Google that word and get information on it. I also have a chapter devoted to it in my book. And it's basically a positive theory of aging developed by a sociologist in Uppsala University in Sweden. He did years of research where he would interview people starting in their late 50s or 60s, all the way up to their death. And he and his students would interview them every year, the same questions, so that they could monitor the changes that these people were going through. And it was this research that led him to develop this theory, again, because he was tired of all the negative theories of aging and wanted to look at the positive developments that happen as we age. Okay, so again, I want to open with a poem because I think as we age, poetry, we move into a more poetic frame of mind. It's more, poetry comes from a deep inner place. And I think that as we age, the inner life becomes more important to us. So Clara is a poet that lives in a community up in Santa Rosa. And we've been good friends for years. She is now in her late 80s. So, new life comes small, insignificant, calling your name in the wound of the unexpected. Like a hawk feather fluttering to your feet, sun shimmer quivering on a wall, cathedral bells telling the times, a rag-wrapped woman lying curled in a doorway, headlines and breadlines shouting war, hunger. Something in every moment offers birth. I chose this poem because unlike the first half of life, where new life often comes big, as we age, new life comes small and insignificant. And it calls out to you in these very subtle ways, like sun shimmering, like a bell tolling. If you live in Berkeley, you hear the Campanile bell. So I think this little poem sets the stage for what we're talking about today. Also, this quote from Cicero, I think, is very appropriate to our discussion today. Basically, he wrote this after Caesar's death, and he was exiled from his home. This was around 44 BC. So, like many of us being older, he had lost his status in his society. He was 63, which isn't that old, but in those days it was pretty old, although they did have people that lived beyond that. But he was in a difficult time of his life. His daughter had recently died. He was very close to her. His son was a ne'er-do-well. And he found himself grappling with the question, should I succumb to the inevitable in sullen despondency or explore its resources? And so he chose the latter, and he wrote this essay, Cato Maya de Senectude, on old age, and addressed it to his friend Atticus. So, and I see, I can't really, oh, there we go. Okay, so he says, each stage of existence has been allotted its own appropriate quality, so that the weakness of childhood, the impetuosity of youth, the seriousness of middle life, the maturity of old age, each bears some of nature's fruit, which must be garnished in its own season. So this is very much in keeping with the next person we're going to talk about, which is Jung, because Jung was very much about the maturity of old age and what we can garnish at this time of life. So we'll talk a little bit about him. This is what he looks like. And just a little bit of his life. His father was a clergy person, actually a whole lineage on his paternal side of people working in the church. His mother was unstable psychologically. She was hospitalized several times for mental health problems when he was a young person, but she was also psychic. And the reason I say this is that these two experiences in his early life opened him up to the kind of psychology that he ended up developing. So on the one hand, there was the religious sensibility from his father's side, and they had a huge library, so he had access to some of the best books in the world at the time. And also his mother's emotional instability and her psychic abilities, which he inherited. These two actually laid the foundations for his thinking, which was really out of the box at the time. And they form a bedrock for the psychology that he developed, which he developed actually in his early 30s after he and Freud split up. And they split over this question of whether there is something more inside of us than our instinctual reactions. So Jung felt that there was a fundamental strata to existence that goes beyond. It's clearly from his religious background, whereas Freud was much more of a materialist, and it was didn't have any kind of perspective that led you beyond what you could see what you could see or intuit in the moment. So from Jung's work, which he learned, he developed a lot of his psychology after he split with Freud, when he went into this huge depression. And some people said he went into a psychotic episode, which is possible because there was psychosis on his mother's side. But he used this experience, he used himself as an experiment to develop a way of understanding our internal landscape, our internal world. So it was that experience and working with his clients that he realized that there was more to the second half of life than anyone had previously talked about. And so these two quotes are from him. later in his life, when he wrote this Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, which is after his own break with Freud and his own mental break, he said, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at evening. And what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie." So what he means here is he's referring to the program of life's morning is our youth. And our evening is our old age. And so those goals and wishes and dreams and values and identities that we developed in our youth, in the morning of our life, when we get to be older, we cannot carry them on anymore. They're meant to be let go of. They've become a lie. And people that are older that continue to try to look younger or be younger really are not able to fully inhabit in a healthy way what is available now in their life, because they can't focus on it because they want something else. And so he says, the afternoon of human life must also have a significance of its own and cannot be merely a pitiful appendage to life's morning. So I want you to get that pen and paper that I told you in the beginning to put beside you. And I want you, we're just going to take a minute. I want you to look at this quote, and I think to jot down some of the ways you have changed as you've let go of your younger self and are maturing into your older self. What are some of the changes? And I'm not talking about the changes that have been imposed on you because of physical limitations, unless those changes have actually ended up opening you to a new way of living. Okay? So it's changes or values that you had that you no longer have. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute and let you do that. Okay, so our next slide is the purpose of all of this. Why do we want to develop a greater awareness as we age, a greater sensitivity? Well, it all has to do with this idea of individuation that Jung talked about, and that Maslow called self-actualization, and that Erik Erikson called integrity. So it's basically the ability to bring into our conscious mind material from the unconscious. So that could be, as we go through life, there's lots and lots of times when things happen to us that we haven't had enough time to process. We're busy raising families, building houses, keeping a career going, being civically engaged. And we don't have the time to process what's happening to us in the moment. And so there's a reason as we get older that memories begin to float to the surface unbidden. We're washing the dishes and some memory comes, or taking a shower, or gardening, or looking out the window. And this is not a mistake. Jung would say this is not a mistake. This is all pre-planned by what he called our psyche, to help us to develop into the particular person that we were meant to be. And that's what individuation is. Because when we're younger, we often take on the expectations of others, and these shape us. You know, the person who maybe wanted to be an artist, but their family wanted them to be a lawyer. Or, I mean, there's just so many examples of ways that we get pushed in our early life into careers and marriages and interests and all kinds of things that we don't necessarily consciously choose. It's just that we are pulled along. And sometimes those things actually match the inner person, but sometimes they don't. And so when we're older, we finally have an opportunity to look at all these forces that have been pressuring us throughout our life. And we can begin to make choices about whether those forces are accurate. Do they reflect who we really are? Or are they pieces of ourselves that we adapted because we needed to adapt them, but we can let them go? And the more we do this, the more we're extracting from the unconscious and bringing into consciousness. And the more we do that, the broader and deeper our experience of ourself and life is. So that a person who is individuating is a person, those are the people that we often feel drawn to. They're the people who don't have a lot of masks. They are who they are, warts and all, and they're not worried about your seeing them that way. And they're authentic. You know that you can trust them. You kind of can look up to them. They are role models for all of us. This is the meaning of individuation for Jung. These are, it's becoming more and more of who you were meant to be. Now that means that there's a plan here somewhere, that someone has a plan about who we're meant to be. But you could look at that religiously, or you could look at it just in terms of psychology and our development, that the more we expand outward and inward, the greater capacity we have for anything that comes our way. So that is Jung's idea of individuation. That is the goal of life for him, that each person develops themselves according to the nature that they were given. And so Alan Chennan has taken Jung's psychology, and in his book Elder Tales, he actually illustrates various capacities that we develop as we age through these fairy tales. So I took 3 of his stories that are short and that illustrate 3 capacities, 3 different but very important capacities. They're all passages that we go through as we age. And we do that when we welcome the aging process, when we don't try to avoid or deny the changes that are happening as we age. So the first movement is this idea of poverty. So I put here a slide where you illustrate youth and old age. And we're juxtaposing what we do in these different times of life. So as a youth, we leave home. We want to escape poverty or oppression. And this involves action and struggle, and our aim is independence. And the virtues are courage, perseverance, and confidence. And when we don't have those things, it's really hard to find our place in the world. On the other hand, the older person, it's the same task, but it's completed in a different way. The older person stays home and deals with his or her poverty. Now, poverty is not lack of economic wherewithal. Poverty is actually symbolic for deprivation, okay? Symbolic for deprivation, loss, the kinds of experiences that we have as we age. We lose lots of stuff when we grow older. It's stuff that we take for granted when we're younger. We lose our health. It's not as robust. We often lose our loved ones. Some of us lose financial security. All of us lose a certain degree of status. We lose our intellectual agility. So, as Cicero pointed out, we could respond to this with despondency or depression, becoming more and more forgetful, having lack of energy, lack of enthusiasm, focusing on all our different ailments and possibilities of ailments. But this story that I'm about to read tells us that there's something beyond the losses. Something what the poet Browning said, the best is yet to be. So this story is called The Fortune and the Woodcutter. Fortune and the Woodcutter. So this is from Asia Minor. Once upon a time, so before I continue reading, just keep your paper and pen beside you because I want you to jot down, and we'll take a little bit of time after the story too, to just jot down your reaction or your associations or your thoughts about this story, positive and negative. Once upon a time, there lived an old woodcutter with his wife. He labored each day in the forest from dawn to dusk, cutting wood to sell in the village. But no matter how hard he struggled, he could not succeed in life. And what he earned in the day, he and his family ate up at night. 2 sons soon brightened his hearth, and they worked by his side. Father and sons cut 3 times the wood and earned 3 times the money. But they ate 3 times the food too. And so the woodcutter was no better off than before. Then the young men left home to seek their own fortunes. After so many years, the old man finally had enough. I've worked for fortune all my life, and she has given us little enough for it. From now on, If Fortune wants to give us anything, she will have to come looking for me. And the woodcutter vowed to work no more. Good heavens, his wife said. If you don't work, we won't eat. What are you saying? Fortune visits great sultans, not poor folk like us. But no matter how much she tried to persuade him, and she reasoned, cried, and yelled, the old woodcutter refused to work. In fact, he decided to stay in bed. Later that day, a stranger came knocking at the door and asked if he could borrow the old man's mules for a few hours. The stranger explained that he had some work to do in the forest and that he noticed the woodcutter was not using his mules. The old man agreed, still lounging in bed. He simply asked the stranger to feed and water the two animals. The stranger took the mules deep into the forest. He was no ordinary man. He was a magician, and through his arts, he had learned where a great treasure lay. So he went to the spot and dug up heaps of gold and jewels, loading the booty on the two mules. But just as he prepared to leave, gloating over his new wealth, soldiers came marching down the road. The stranger became frightened. He knew that if the soldiers found him with the treasure, they would ask questions. His sorcery would be discovered and he would be condemned to death. So the stranger fled into the forest and was never seen or heard from again. The soldiers, meanwhile, went along their way, noticing nothing unusual, and so the two mules waited undisturbed in the forest. After many hours, they started for home on their own, following the trails they had used with the woodcutter for many years. When they arrived at the woodcutter's house, his wife saw the poor animals. She ran upstairs. "Dear husband, come quickly. You must unload the mules before they collapse." The husband yawned and turned over in bed. "If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. I'm not working anymore." The poor woman hurried downstairs, thought for a second, and fetched a kitchen knife. She ran to the mules and slashed the bags on their backs to lighten the load. Gold and jewels poured out, flashing in the sun. "Oh," she exclaimed. In a flash, her husband was downstairs and he stared in astonishment at the treasure spilling into their yard. He grabbed his wife and they danced deliriously. "Fortune did come to us after all," he exulted. And when the old man and his wife gave half their treasure to their sons and half the remainder to the poor, they were still as rich could be. So, before we go a little further into this, we could look at this story as this old man having a tantrum, right? But notice there's a lot of important stuff in this. First of all, he must resist his wife's pleas. Okay? He must work to preserve his leisure. So, in many ways, we all have within us a character like the wife. Okay? The one who wants us to keep doing over being. Okay? It's a convention to keep working, to keep busy. You know, we all have our particular version of this. And so in order for him to get the kind of leisure time that he needs, he has to actively resist those voices inside his head that tell him that he has to get up and he has to work and he has to keep doing what he's been doing all along, right? But this enforced leisure, by doing this, he clears the way for something new. He makes possible for something different to come, something that is not like what would have come in his youth. So he's being willing to go against the grain. And we each have our own grain. So the first thing is to think a moment about what is the grain inside yourself that you often have to go against. We all have within us multiple voices that tell us what we should be doing. So what is your should be grain? That's the first thing to just jot down, because that is being with our own poverty. Being able to identify and acknowledge what that is shows us our own poverty, our own inability to step out of the usual rut and open ourselves to other possibilities and others' creativity. And the other part of this story that involves trust is the mules. We all have mules that we have trained in our lifetime. And these are faithful to us. They are faithful animals. They represent our hard work and the skill that we have developed. And that isn't going anywhere. They are like a return on our investment. And so they can perhaps take us in a new direction if we can let go of the old long enough for something to take its place. We have many, many examples of older adults who develop skills and abilities and talents and qualities in their old age that they never would have even thought of in their wildest dreams as belonging to them when they were younger. So these are ways we have of dealing with our initial poverty that opens us to something that is magical, that's always been there, but never had an opportunity to flourish. So again, just take a moment and think about something that you have developed. It could be a quality or a talent or an interest that surprised you. Like, for instance, I have a friend who's a psychologist who's 90 now. She spent her life was the life of the mind. And she never really liked sports. Now she's an avid basketball person. I mean, she watches all the games. She can tell you all the scores and the players. This is a total shock to her. So it doesn't have to be something huge and big. It's what are some of the small things? It might be big, but there's also small things. So take a moment and see what you can come up with before we go to our next story. Okay, so our next story has to do with what is called in psychology the shadow. It is that part of ourselves that is in darkness. It's the shadow. We don't see it. And it has within it, both our qualities that we like and value, and maybe has qualities that we've never even acknowledged that we have inside of ourselves that are positive. And it also has the painful places inside of ourselves, the inadequacies. Often we're not even aware of them. So, again, looking at these two different phases of life, when we're young, the fairy tales talk about enemies. They talk about enemies as dragons and witches and ogres. Well, those are the kinds of qualities usually inside of ourselves as young people that we have to deal with. We have to confront them in order to be able to go out into the world and affect the change that we want to make, either in ourselves or in others. And usually youth will use a sword to do that. And of course, we don't use swords in our modern day, but we have our equivalent. We could have our sword of skill, or our sword of intelligence, or our sword of ideas. We all have our particular ways of slashing through our world to get what we want, right? We all have our particular set of a skill set to do that. And the moral threat is a vulnerable sense of self. So the young person really needs to develop a solid sense of self, to know that they exist, to know who they are, to know they need this in order to be successful. So self-founding is their task. But the older person, the enemy isn't outside, it's inside. The enemy is those parts of ourself that I think of as undigested bits of potato, that these are places inside that hold experiences that we never really metabolized. We never really digested them. They kind of like sit inside of us and wait for an opportunity to come out in a memory or some kind of event that is disagreeable, that brings out that inner vulnerability. So at the older person, it's a struggle with painful insight, but it's within. And instead of the sword, the older person uses their reflection, which develops into insight, and wisdom to divert rather than oppose. So the older person, it's not a direct frontal attack on this material. Instead, it's an integration of it. And the moral threat is the ego. So when we're young, we have to develop an ego to survive in the world. It has to be a strong ego. But the ego can be a problem when we're older. We need to be able to let go of that sense of self-importance because there's something greater. And so the task then becomes self-transcendence. And so this story that we're going to look at now is called The Magic Towel. And it is about an older person in very graphic detail coming to a painful insight about herself and developing her shadow quality of compassion and love. So this story is from Japan, It's called The Magic Towel. Do we have a minute to? No, we're going to do it later. Okay. So once upon a time, an old woman lived with her son and daughter-in-law. The old mother resented the young woman's beauty and made life hard for her, ordering her to do all the heavy work in the house. The young woman was sweet and kind and made no complaint, which only infuriated the old woman more. One day, the old woman told her daughter-in-law to make rice cakes. And when the young woman was finished, the old woman counted them. Then she went to the village on an errand. A traveling monk stopped by the house, and the young woman gave him a rice cake. After the priest left, the old woman returned, counted the cakes, and immediately noticed one was missing. "What have you done with that last cake, you greedy, vain thing?" "I gave it to the monk," the young woman said, trying to calm the woman. "Well, you must fetch it back," the mother-in-law yelled. So the young woman ran after the monk and asked for the rice cake back. He laughed and returned the gift. And he gave the young woman a small towel. "Use it to wash your face," he said. "I know that life is hard with your mother-in-law." From then on, the old woman noticed that her daughter-in-law became more and more beautiful. This made the old woman even more jealous, and so she spied on her daughter-in-law one morning. She saw the young woman wipe her face with the towel, and each time she did so, her face became more radiant and lovely. "She uses a magic towel," the old woman muttered. So the next day, the old woman sent her daughter-in-law on an errand, and she stole the magic towel. She washed her face and peered at herself in the mirror, but there was no change. "Oh, I'm older," she thought, "so I must wash harder." She wiped her face over and over and then looked in the mirror. To her horror, her face became long and horse-like, and then hairy and round like a monkey's. Finally, she changed into a goblin. "Ah!" the old woman cried and collapsed on the floor. When her daughter-in-law returned, she saw the demon in the house and tried to flee. But the old woman cried out, "Help me!" The daughter-in-law recognized the old woman's voice and felt sorry for her. "You must find a remedy," the old woman pleaded. So the daughter-in-law ran out looking for the monk. She found him some distance away and told him what happened. He laughed again. "When a wicked person uses the towel," he said, "they end up looking like a demon." "Is there no cure?" the young woman asked. "Yes," the monk said. "Just tell your mother-in-law to use the other side of the towel." The young wife ran home and told the old woman the remedy. The mother-in-law immediately turned the towel over and wiped her face. The first time, her face changed from a goblin to a monkey. The second time, from a monkey to a horse's snout. And the third time, it became her own wrinkled but human face. The old woman embraced her daughter-in-law and wept. "Dear daughter, I did not see how ugly I was toward you." And from that day on, the old woman never spoke a cross word to anyone. She became kind and generous and worked side by side with her daughter-in-law. The old woman hoped that the priest with the magic towel would return someday so she could thank him. But he never did come back, nor did he need to. So again, this towel is like the mask or the image that we have of ourselves, the image we have of ourselves to ourselves and to others. And when we're young, it's important to master our masks. But when we're old, we need to learn to remove them so that the inner substance can come out in our outer appearance. So some of our masks might be the way we've tended to be judgmental of ourselves or others, the way we relate to uncertainty, needing to have everything battened down versus being comfortable with uncertainty. So those are some of the masks. We have many. The other mask that is involved in this time of life is this dichotomy between good and evil. I mean, in the story, the old woman's really evil, but actually she's acting out of fear and greed. And all she needs is a little push to develop the compassion that is innate in her. So this kind of either or thinking that is important in the first half of life. We need either or thinking because we have to sort things out. But the second half of life, things become more gray. We tend to look at compromise more. We tend to accept ambiguity and uncertainty. In a way, this story is another version of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, right? So let's just take another minute and look at some of the light and the dark shadow that you have been dealing with in your older age. What are some of the things that you have difficulty accepting about yourself? That's your dark shadow. And what kinds of thoughts or projects or abilities have come forward for you that surprised you at this time of life? So again, we're going to take a minute and jot those things down. Okay, so the last story we're going to look at has to do, it's one of my favorite stories. As in my own aging, I just find tremendous joy in contemplating this particular quality that develops as we age. So it has to do with the beauty of possibility when we've allowed ourselves to ripen. It has to do with a return of innocence and an emancipation from convention. So as a youth, we want to win the great treasure or the great love or the great project. And when that happens, a new world opens up. It's our world, our particular way of putting our world together. And the theme is victory and personal reward, the outcome. The youth quest is always away from home, into the outer world and the future. It raises consciousness to its apex. It's the flower of humanity. But the elder quest, it's to break out of social convention and practical rationality, to break out of fitting in, twisting oneself into a pretzel to be acceptable in whatever environment you want to be. It's emancipation over victory. It's that freedom that comes. To have victory, you have to be a certain way oftentimes. But to be emancipated, you don't have to twist yourself into anything. Innocence is the outcome. That joyfulness of childhood, where children are not, if they haven't been damaged early in life, they don't worry about how they look or how they seem. Their innocence is one of the things that we find so attractive. And we have the potential to develop this in our later life. So the elder quest is to return home and the past to a more fundamental experience. So the elder deepens consciousness and is the root of humanity rather than the flower. So our tale is from Japan. It's called The Six Statues. Again, take some time to jot down as you listen whatever occurs to you. And then we'll have some time at the end to reflect on how we see this in our life. So it's from Japan, The Six Statues. Once upon a time, there lived a kind old man and woman who were very poor. One New Year's Eve, they found they had no money to buy rice cakes for the holiday. Then they remembered 7 straw hats the old man had made some time before. I shall go to the village to sell them, the old man said. So his wife put one of the hats on his head and the other 6 on his shoulders, and off he went in the snow. All that day, the old man tried peddling his hats, but no one bought any. So late in the afternoon, he trudged up the snowy trail back to his house, wrapped in misery. On his way, he noticed 6 statues of God standing in the snow. They were the guardian deities of children and looked so cold and lonely that the old man paused. I cannot leave you to shiver here, he said. And so he gave each statue a straw hat, carefully tying the hats on each of the gods' heads. Then he returned home. The old woman sighed when her husband told her he had no rice cakes, but she smiled when he described giving his hats to the 6 statues. Imagine how happy they must be, she said. Later that night, after a meager New Year's Eve dinner, the old man and his wife went to bed. At midnight, they were awakened by strange noises outside their door. "Who could that be?" the old man exclaimed. They listened and made out the sound of people singing. At that moment, their door flew open and a bag landed in the middle of their hut. It fell open, revealing the prettiest rice cakes the old man and his wife had ever seen, smelling sweet and fresh. And when they looked through their door, they saw 6 statues, sorry, each with a straw hat, bowing a New Year's greeting to them. So first, before I talk, I want to just say that in Japanese culture, rice cakes are ritual food. It would be similar to the Christian Eucharist or the Jewish Passover. So rice cakes are something that provides spiritual sustenance, not simply physical food. And so in this story, this old man's behavior is quite irrational. I mean, practically speaking, he could have saved those hats and sold them at the market in the summer instead of in the winter, right? Because they were straw hats, all right? So right off the bat, we see that this is not business as usual. He's attending to a different kind of rationality, a different kind of practicality. He gives these hats to the statues. So there is a way that as we grow older, we begin to take notice of what is called animism. It's the reverence for life, for flowers and plants and rocks, things that we might not even have noticed when we were younger. But there's a way that life pops out of us in unusual places. And so here, the life that he sees in these stone cold statues, he relates to them from his heart rather than from his practical head. And these statues are guardian deities of children, and children have this, they also have this capacity for seeing into and not being restricted by practicalities of things. That's what makes childhood so magical. So the payment that these statues offer is reminiscent of that wonderful old Greek story of Bacchus and Philemon, this old couple who had nothing and yet offer what they have to the gods Zeus and Hermes. Whereas when they had gone to the big houses that were opulent, they were turned away. So it's the same kind of acknowledgement of this beautiful flowering of innocence that is possible when we are older. This reverence that we have that is actually close to a mystical consciousness. And it's also reminiscent of Martin Buber, the Jewish theologian, talking about the I versus the thou, the I of the ego versus the thou of the other, that we need to relate to people as a thou rather than an I. So again, I'd like us to take a minute and jot down anything about the story that struck you in particular, but also take a moment and look at your own life, and can you remember any ways in which you yourself have acted non-conventionally for you since you've started getting older? Have you noticed any ways that a reverence for life has developed within you? Sort of like the poem that we started, Claire's poem, where the sun shimmers on a wall and you stop to notice it where you wouldn't have before. Or you hear cathedral bells. So again, we'll take a moment and then we'll come back. Okay, so in the interest of having enough time for Q&A, I'm not going to go through the last part of the presentation. If you're interested, you can Google Joe Transcendence, or you could find that I wrote a chapter in my book about this, but I just want to point out that Lars developed this theory of changes across 3 dimensions as we age. And we've touched on each of these dimensions as we have gone through our 3 stories. It's amazing how these Jung, Chennan, and also Erickson, and even Maslow and Tornstrom, they're all aligned in this revisioning of older age. So the first is a cosmic, which is a shift in our relationship to time and also to space. And there's a sort of like our first story on poverty is kind of like that, this shifting into a different way of seeing ourselves, a different way of seeing time and space. And then there's the shift in our relationship to ourselves, which has to do a lot with our second story. And then the third, a shift in our personal and social relationships, and that has a lot to do with our third story. So we won't go into them in time, but I do want to end with this lovely poem, and then we'll move to Q&A. So it's called Lightening the Load by Reverend Francis Doff. The first thing we have to do is to notice that we've loaded down the camel with so much baggage, we'll never get through the desert alive. Something has to go. Then we can begin to dump the 1,000 things we've brought along until even the camel has to go and we're walking barefoot on the desert sand. There's no telling what will happen then, but I've heard that someone walking in this way has seen a burning bush. So I thank you for your attention. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. And I'd like to open this up to any comments or questions or anything that anyone would like to share about this last hour or so that we've been hanging out together. Yeah, Barbara.
I'm very appreciative. This was really, really a very special time. I have 4 pages of notes. I took screenshots of the handouts. It's really been very interesting, and my wheels are spinning, and I can see some evolution, and I can also see some space still to grow. I'm still tied up in a pretzel. So it's good to know that that's a task to continue to work on, and that there is hope. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. That's really great. Yeah, it's one, I think that it's this kind of way of approaching aging makes it interesting. Mm-hmm. It's like we're never a finished, complete project. Yeah. There's always something else to learn, and we can enjoy this pretzelness because we can pull it apart and explore it and use our curiosity to deepen our experience of life. So it's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Birdie, you're muted.
Muted.
Ah, no?
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you.
There we go.
No?
Okay, good. All right, you got it, Birdie.
I got it. Yes, I also want to thank you. It's very interesting. You know, it certainly made you sort of think in very different directions, and you know, most interesting presentation, and I'm glad I joined. But as a joke, I'd like to ask you, where can I buy a magic towel?
What?
Very good. I know we all want a magic towel. No, and the only answer I can give you is it's inside, and you got to find it.
I know. It's worth looking for.
It's definitely worth looking for. Yes, it'll be a fun adventure.
Yes, exactly. Well, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yes, Nancy.
You know, when you got to the last part about, how did you put it? The task of the last?
The innocence?
Yeah. The innocence and the joyfulness of childhood. I have a view of the bay. I sit in my kitchen. I cannot express in words, trust me, cannot express in words the deep pleasure that looking out day after day after day after day after day, something that would have bored me when I was young.
Yes,
but incredible. And then to look at the art in my kitchen and everywhere in the house, but every day I see something new.
Yes.
And I sit and listen. No words can express that. And I was very grateful for your description.
Yes.
of that
Yes.
experience. And so the pandemic has been like, oh, fine,
Mm-hmm.
bring it on.
Yes. Thank
Not,
you so much.
okay.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that is so perfect. That is exactly it. And you know, that's actually for those people that can sink into it that are younger, that are going through COVID, they are getting a taste of the positive places that we can find inside and outside ourselves when we have the time. So it's so beautiful to notice the bay, to notice your pictures. It's like, this is what I meant by, you know, in the outer, there's one story that Tornstrom talks about he asked this woman in her 60s what she really liked to do, or was it her early 70s? I don't remember. But she used to like to go to the theater and have dinner with friends. That was what gave her joy. And then he went back to her when she was like in her 80s or something. And she said, I love to sit on the porch and watch the swallows swoop overhead.
There you go.
It's exactly what you talked about, Nancy. That's exactly it. It's like the preciousness of the small. It's so enlivening.
And the first time in my life now, when I read the paper, as I do a lot of the day, while the bay is over there and the art is over there, there's no motor running. You know, the feeling of I gotta something, I don't know. It's home at home. It is so peaceful and gorgeous and not boring at all.
I know. Yes. Wonderful. Well, welcome to the positive side of aging.
But I did take a Jungian analysis earlier and became one myself.
Oh, well, that makes a difference.
But doing the work.
Yeah, you primed the pump.
Yes. Well, I had to.
Yes. Lovely. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, Janet and Bert.
Yeah, nowhere did you mention death, and that seems to be a preoccupation with getting older.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if Jung had anything to say about dealing with the expectation of death.
Yeah, well, actually, you know, that's something that Tornstrom's research shows. And what his research shows is that as people age, their fear of death decreases. So they become much more comfortable with this idea because, you know, death is like this phenomenon of letting go. And if we have done our aging well, we have been letting go the whole time. I mean, from the time we start entering into old age, we're constantly being challenged to let go of so much outer stuff in particular, but also inner stuff. You know, our ideas, our health, our goals, ambitions. I mean, there's so much that we let go of as we age. Death is that final letting go, and there is less fear about death. There's almost, I mean, Tornstrom thinks about it because older people become so familiar with death, with seeing death around them. Even like we're in a period of death right now, we're in autumn, right? This is like, right, a prelude to death. Winter is death. So there's that aspect that they've lived through, but there's also the death of their friends as well. And it doesn't become so fearsome. For people who are afraid of death, you know, those people oftentimes have not done their inner work. They are still wanting to hold on to, they're still tightly grasping some aspect of life. And oftentimes, if you can talk with them and get into their story, you can find that it's possible that they actually can begin to let go because there's something that they haven't finished that they need to complete. but there is this wonderful sense of completion, and it does show up in Tornstrom's research. Thank you for bringing that up, because I didn't go into Tornstrom. So yeah, thank you.
That was good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Did Jung have anything to say about it?
He had a lot to say about it. There's actually a whole book on death in children's dreams. Yeah. So he didn't specifically talk about death, but in his own, in his own book on memories, dreams, reflections, which is sort of like his autobiography, he talks about a death experience he had in his 50s. He, I think, had a heart attack or a stroke or something, and he almost died, and he was in this altered state, which he seemed to be prone to anyway. And the doctors brought him back, and he didn't want to come back, and he was really pissed. So again, and he talks about that experience and also his feelings about death as being another state. So his Memories, Dreams, Reflections is a wonderful book to read. It's he's kind of obtuse as a writer, but not in this book. He's not battling anybody, accusing him of being a mystic. So he doesn't have any, he's not going off into these theories to defend himself or anything. He's just presenting who he is. Yeah. So Amy, yeah, hi.
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, thanks, Sandi, for doing this. This was really wonderful. And first, I'd like to actually make a plug for your book here again.
Oh, thank you.
I haven't quite finished it, but I love the history. Sandi goes into the history of caretaking for older people. That is, there's a lot in there that I think most of us don't really know, and it's very interesting information. And also, to go back to what Nancy said, what occurred to me was she's sitting on her porch watching either the swallows or the bay. How do you describe what it feels like to be our age, 70 or 80 or more, to younger people? And I thought that was a wonderful way to describe it. I love to go to the theater and live performance. I do it all the time and be out there in the world. And I also love now to sit quietly and watch what's around me. And that's a huge shift, that the whole world is right there without ever moving anywhere.
Yes, yes, that's right. Exactly. It's right there. That's so beautiful. Yeah. I think as more of us age and we develop or relish these capacities that come to us, I think those are the kinds of things that younger people notice and attract the younger person to the older person. I know for myself, I've worked with older people for a gazillion years, and the people that I was most attracted to were those people who had that sense of calm about them, and they would notice things that, sometimes I would get irritated. I was like on my goal, we're going to the doctor or wherever, but they're like stopping to smell the roses. I'm like, oh my God. But it really made an impression on me. And now I see why. Thanks for bringing that up. And thanks for the book. I'm glad you're liking that bit. Thanks. Yes, Susan.
I just realized, based on what Amy said, that the one thing I'm not ready to die yet is I haven't done enough travel. There's so many more places I want to go and see and experience. Mm-hmm. So because of COVID, I had to cancel. And one of the pleasures for me of travel is the looking forward to, the learning about, the planning. And so not having that right now makes me very sad. Mm-hmm. And somebody on Nextdoor wrote that they felt like, I guess I just turned 80, that they felt like 20% of their life has been taken away from them. And for some reason that really hit me.
So, Susan, I want to ask you, what I mean, this is something for you to explore, because you're right. Because of COVID, you can't travel now. And also, you know, I know that from my experience, most of us can travel till we're about 84 or so, and then 85. Then it begins to be too cumbersome. So in the future, you're not going to be able to travel. So what I would like you to contemplate is, what about the experience of travel feeds you? I mean, this is something to contemplate.
Meeting people.
Huh?
Meeting people.
Okay, so that's one thing. I would make a list of those things. I would make a list of, and drill down in your question. So the first is like meeting people. Okay, what else? And then what about meeting people? Because there are certain inherent in these experiences that we have when we're younger that are limited when we're older. There's a core in that experience. And if you can get to that core, you can find ways of replicating that core right now in your life, because it's the core that you want. The external is just that. It's the vehicle that gives you the core. And what you want is the core. And so if you can travel, you don't have to really go there because you're getting it. But this is a good time when you can't, to drill down into that core for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I am just so happy to have met you all, and grateful.
Thank you, Sandi. I appreciate you being here today. And thank you for everybody as well for listening and asking such great questions. Yeah. Hope everybody has a beautiful day today. Thank you again.
And a good holiday.
And a happy holiday. Exactly. Thank you, Sandi.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.